The Charlotte Ledger Podcast is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network.
This episode of the Charlotte Ledger Podcast is sponsored by Catapult Employers Association. Catapult is your trusted Charlotte-based HR partner in this rapidly changing business landscape. Queen City employers face unique challenges, from navigating confusing new compliance regulations and I-9 audits to evolving DEI expectations in our diverse community. Get the localized HR expertise, legal guidance, and essential resources Charlotte business leaders rely on to protect what they've built. Join your fellow Charlotte employers who stay ahead with Catapult. Learn more at letscatapult.org.
Hey, it's Tony Mecia with the Charlotte Ledger, and you're listening to the Charlotte Ledger Podcast. You can find out more about the Charlotte Ledger at thecharlotteledger.com. Today's podcast is a little bit different. It's a recording of a webinar session we held with Catapult Employers Association, in which we're exploring trends in the workplace in 2025. We're actually releasing recordings of all three sessions. The first one looks at an overview of workplace trends. The second one discusses how to recruit and hire employees. And the third one talks about retaining, motivating, and developing your workforce. Many thanks to Catapult for teaming up with the Charlotte Ledger on this special webinar series that is now a 3-part podcast series. You can find out more about Catapult and the services it provides to employers at letscatapult.org. Enjoy. We have a really good panel today, experts talking about retaining and developing employees. I'd like to introduce them. Dr. Carlie Houchins leads the Learning Solutions team, responsible for designing, developing, and deploying products focused on meeting the learning and development needs of Catapult's customers. And in this role, she keeps the team focused on providing engaging and valuable experiences for learners through relevant content delivered across multiple platforms to ensure that employers are ready to meet the challenges of a changing and competitive environment. She has more than 20 years of marketing and consulting experience in Fortune 50 organizations, including Procter & Gamble and Wells Fargo, as well as experience teaching at Central Piedmont College, Queen's University, and Johnson & Wales University. We also have Jill Feldman. She's the Director of Strategic HR Services at Catapult. She leads a team of experienced HR experts who help Catapult's members attract, retain, and motivate employees, maximize productivity, elevate organizational effectiveness, and improve employee engagement. She's a career HR leader with broad expertise across multiple industries, including healthcare, manufacturing, technology, nonprofit, and professional services. Welcome, Jill.
Thank you, Tony. I'm so happy to be here.
I think we're going to have a good discussion today. It's a really important topic because, as we mentioned in the webinar a couple days ago, talking to Cheryl Richards and Doug Blizzard and looking at some of the trends that they were seeing, it's just so important nowadays, given the job market, given how hard it is to find employees, that once you have those employees, good employees, you want to hang on to them. You want to keep them. And so we want to talk today about what are some strategies for doing that and how can we be as companies, more intentional about doing that. And so I guess I just want to start kind of broad and ask, what is it nowadays that employees expect from their companies and how has that changed?
Well, Tony, that's such a great question. And again, you talked about why it's so important for retention. Because as you heard from Cheryl Richards, she talked about the fact that there's a global talent shortage right now. There just aren't enough people out there. I've seen a recent statistic that by 2030, there's going to be a global talent shortage of about 85 million people. So we're just not going to be able to find that new talent, as you talked about yesterday with recruiting, always going out and looking for new talent. So those people just don't exist. Organizations are really going to need to change their strategies for filling roles by looking within. And that's what employees want. Employees, we're finding now that employees are coming into organizations, especially younger employees, and they're looking for, how will this company develop me as a leader? How can I grow within the company? What professional advancement opportunities will I have? And so it's really so important to think about those things as you think about, how can I retain those top performers? We know now, just thinking about retention in general, some sobering statistics I'll share with you. So according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 20% of new employees leave their company within the first 45 days. I mean, think about that. Another 31% will quit their jobs within the first year. So you can see there's a real challenge with retaining those folks. If just even getting them past that first year. The average employee only stays with the company 4.1 years. So think about that. Constant, recruiting. It's like a vicious cycle. The key and really the best ROI for companies is when you get those great employees, when you recruit them, you want to keep them for years to come. That's what's so important. And thinking about how you can develop them and grow them within your own company so that they will stay. That's really, I think that's going to be the key.
Yeah, I know we talked a little bit yesterday on the recruiting part of it, how you don't just want to say, okay, here's the job description. You want to be able to tell prospective employees, here's where you could be in a few years. Here's the possibility for advancement. Here are some things we will do for you, that it's not just having them accept you as a company, but it's a two-way street, right? And that you need to actually give something back and not just say, okay, I guess it's sort of an older school mentality, I think, where it's like, okay, I'm paying you to do a job. You're working for me, do the job. It's like, no, if you want to keep them in a competitive environment, you need to be able to offer them something and offer them a path to something else or a chance to learn something new. So how can employers do that?
Well, I think that last part of your question about the learning, is resonates for me at, my role at Catapult. And I would just say that coming off of what Jill mentioned about particularly younger workers coming into the workforce, the reality is they are looking for that partnership with an employer and assurances that they're going to have a role in the future and being accomplished through training and development. So the skills that they have today, in a few years, they're going to need different ones. Business changes, the economy changes, the marketplace changes, technology changes, and all of that ensures that what you know today is not going to be all you need to know in a few years. And your contribution as an employee to the future success of your employer really depends on that development of new skills, new capabilities, and whether it goes in the direction of reskilling for a whole new career, a whole new function, a whole new organization, or it falls into the bucket of upskilling, where it's adding to the capabilities that employee has so that they can continue to contribute more, they're more effective, more efficient in the role that they have. Training and development is but one way in the whole experience of the employer-employee relationship. But it really is foundational, because ultimately businesses want their people to be able to do the next thing that keeps their business successful. And so, the investment in the right, staff members and those folks who've shown potential, who have proven themselves to be strong performers, is not only beneficial to that individual, but really is a benefit to the organization as they see more productivity that comes out of that investment. So whether it's digital skills or it's durable skills, a variety of types of training can contribute to that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'd also like to point out, if you're watching today, if you have a question, go ahead and drop it in the chat. It's actually the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You can just drop it right in there, and we'll get the questions. We'll ask those in a little bit. But you mentioned upskilling and you mentioned reskilling. So could you go a little bit deeper on sort of what's the difference between those two, and then how does that relate to this engagement and retention?
Yeah. Well, Tony, the reskilling, those terms are typically used interchangeably, but they really do represent a different experience. If you're looking at going into a new role, regardless of staying with your organization or moving on, if you're looking for a new role, you want to make a career change, then it's likely going to require that you acquire new skills and know how to do those new things. That can happen through formal education, going back for a degree that that provides you with that knowledge and skills. But it can also be accomplished more informally through training and development that happens with a current employer. So it really is that new function, new job, new role that really falls into the reskilling. So taking someone who was in job function X and retraining them into job function Y, for a future opportunity. Upskilling, it's really keeping up. It is knowing that the job that you have today is going to evolve. It's going to change. Sometimes it feels very fast, and employees who want that opportunity to stay current, really have to be looking for and provided opportunities to add new skills. Whether and largely people think about digital skills, and AI is a big, what do we do and how is that going to affect our work? I'm not an AI expert. I don't know that many people claim to be an AI expert at this point, but we can see that coming. And there's a recognition among employers that it is going to change what we need our employees to do, and the contribution that they're going to make in combination with machines that have learned to do certain tasks and functions. And that's just a really good example of, we still need people. How do they transition into that new world of work? And upskilling it is oftentimes the case. Even folks whose work is not highly technical, there's still new things that will make them more effective and efficient and productive in their roles.
So if I'm a company, what does that look like? How do I do that? Do I draw on expertise that I have within my company and set up a mentoring arrangement? Do I find
Absolutely.
an outside organization to get a certification or some sort of training? How do I actually pull the trigger on that?
Yeah, it's really all the above. Depending on the size of your organization and the existing talent pool that you have, that mentoring relationship can be a low or no cost way of helping individuals to develop some awareness and some knowledge and ultimately competency in a different role, adding to their capabilities. Asking, someone who shows a lot of promise and a lot of initiative can also be challenged with the opportunity to work on a project that's a little outside their scope and learn from that exposure and that type of experience, more about how the organization actually works, understanding that what they do and how it connects to what's going on in the rest of the organization can open up and broaden their perspective on how they can contribute more going forward. So those are fabulous options for companies that have the bandwidth and have the staff, that they are ready to do something like that for an employee who is also ready. In a lot of cases, the formal side of adult learning, which is something that Catapult offers, both public and private group types of training, can also be another way if you need to get people trained on Excel. We've had a lot of interest in the technical or digital skills that we offer, that portfolio of our training programs, and we can enable that person in a day to begin to use that technology. So rather than it spreading out over a project or a mentorship, if the requirement is they need to know how to do this and the need is immediate, formal training is another way to accomplish that. It does come with a price tag, but again, it's an investment, not just in the individual, but in the organization as a whole. And it runs the gamut, how you do it. And it's not all one or the other. It's a collection depending on the circumstances.
Do you have any thoughts?
I was going to build on that a little bit on what Carlie said. I think we get the question a lot from our members. especially from smaller organizations who are maybe a little more flat in their structure. There's not a lot of levels where employees can come in and see a clear path for growth. How do I grow into that new role? A lot of times employees assume that means a new title, a promotion. How do I get from here to there? And often, this what Carlie described is what we say to those organizations, that development and growth, don't always just mean a promotion, a new title, moving up the levels, but it is taking on those, project opportunities outside of their scope. That's really another way that you can look at developing your talent. Again, those types of opportunities offer, it's just a really great opportunity for their growth, and will definitely contribute to just feeling more engaged, more involved in the company. Again, all of those things that will lead to employee retention, which is what we all want.
Yeah, I do think sometimes as a manager, there can be a tendency to want to pigeonhole your workers and think, okay, well, this person is good at this, so I'm going to double down and give them more of the same thing, when really maybe what they want is not more of the same thing, but a little bit, learn different parts of the company, even if you might not consider them traditionally to be qualified, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
And that's interesting, Tony. I think that on Tuesday it was mentioned that the whole hiring process, and Jill's team is much more expert in this, but there's a shift towards skills-based hiring as opposed to credential, degree, that type of thing, which in years past and in generations past, that was the key, have a degree, have a certificate, those types of things. But then what can you do? And making sure that, the skills that people have, not only when they come in, but then continuing to develop that so that the employee, I have a business background. It's all bottom line. If your employees are more productive and engaged and feel connected and understanding, it's not wasted time or effort to achieve that, so that the employee contributes in a greater sense to the overall success of the organization.
Yeah, and I do want to mention, if anybody has any questions, go ahead, drop those in the chat. It's the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we will get to those. Yeah, I mean, I do think there's this issue, we talked a couple days ago about, okay, is it sort of the soft skills? Is it a certification? Is it technical knowledge? And I've always sort of felt like in what we do, we're a local media company. And so when we hire a reporter, we want someone who's curious. And it's hard, in my opinion, to teach someone to be curious. Now, we can teach them the writing part. We can teach them the technical aspects of it. But finding some of those qualities that are a little harder to teach is sort of what we look for on the front end. But then it's like, how can we develop someone sort of once they're in the door, and what can they be taught? Any thoughts on sort of what sort of things are teachable and what sort of things are innate?
Well, that's an age-old question, and there are probably folks who know the answers to that or have opinions on that. I think that for organizations and businesses, you do want to start with a foundation. You hire somebody in with a foundation. They have a certain skill set that meets the need that you're looking to achieve. But once they're in the door, looking for those individuals and preparing and having opportunity for them to make a greater contribution is something that I think most businesses not only they rely on that, but their own success depends on that you bring people in and then developing some of them. And we know that every industry is changing, and a lot of the retention has to do with can the organization and the industry changes be translated into skills and talent and capabilities that the employees have to contribute to that. Businesses don't exist in a vacuum. Employees don't exist in a vacuum. What's going on in the outside world, whether you're in industries that are highly complex and technical, traditionally IT, healthcare, et cetera, we also know that every other industry is being modified and changed and challenged due to digital revolutions and so forth. And so making sure that your staff has the ability to utilize those digital tools, but also foundational elements like communication and leadership and management. And, I know that with Catapult, we really believe that, the durable skills are important regardless of where you are in the organization, being able to communicate, and that includes listening, and connecting with people. All of that really matters. The digital skills are equally important in virtually every role that an organization might have. So it's really not one or the other, it's all the above.
And you mentioned leadership. I know we've talked a little bit sort of about it's technical skills, but what about this idea of leadership? I mean, there's a lot of interest, I think, in organizations and for succession planning, and I've got to get the next generation ready. I'm maybe getting ready to retire, and how do you grow that next generation of leaders? Do you have any suggestions, for companies that might be wanting to do that?
Jill, do you want to start that? I mean, I have answers, but they all have to. Let's see if we can get broader here.
Well, I loved what we talked about earlier when Carlie mentioned about mentorship and thinking along those lines. Really, again, it comes into succession planning and thinking about who's coming up. We've all worked with those people that you just have the spark, have the curiosity, who are just great at what they do. Maybe they're not, you can see the potential in them. And so that, what I say is we should all be looking at, our own succession plans and within our own teams, our own organizations, for thinking about how to develop those leaders. And there's really great ways to do succession planning, to think about, the next 5-10 years in your organization, whether it's coaching programs, training programs, mentoring, all those things. Really, there's just not one way, of course. And I know Carlie has a lot to say on the learning side of things. But again, it really is about thinking, what are the skills that are needed? Things like strategic thinking and innovation and critical thinking. I know, Carlie, we talked about that.
Yes.
Those are not things, that people will always have right away early in their career. And there's, so all those different ways with coaching and training and mentoring.
And I'll just come back to connecting where, if you're in that role, you mentioned somebody, thinking about retiring and that kind of thing. If you're in that role and you have an idea of where you think your business, your organization can go, connecting that back to the people in your organization and evaluating and looking for and being intentional around what are the capabilities that we see today and what is the potential that we see tomorrow, and introducing some of that leadership development to them, whether it's informally or in a course. We're not born strategic thinkers. We're not born innovators. We can learn these things. And whether it is from an example and, somebody else in your organization giving you the time and the attention to help develop that, or it's in a more formal training program where you begin to see how things connect and, put that learning into application in your workplace. I mean, one of the things I think we pride ourselves on at Catapult is that the courses that we offer, the training content that we develop, is matched between information and experience. Adults learn because they want to, not because somebody told them they had to, for the most part. But if the most successful learning is when your employees see the where it's going and why it makes sense. They see purpose in it. And so matching the business objectives and helping your employees to see how their development is going to contribute to that, it creates this sense of connectedness and inclusion that I think that a lot of employers are really looking to try and have that kind of culture in their organizations. So it's a system. It's all connected. It's not one thing. It's not the other thing.
And again, if people have questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom. I want to put you on the spot a little bit and just ask you, can you think of any examples of companies that you've worked with that have done a really good job of developing this training or leadership or really take this into account? We don't need to name names necessarily, but do you have any in your head where it's like, here's an issue they had, here's how they solved it?
Well, I'm thinking of a local nonprofit here in Charlotte, and I'll just leave it at that. And we've worked with them over probably the better part of the last decade on a leadership academy. And they used the training content that we had and connected it to the roles that they had in their company. And they had a process internally where you had to be, your self-nomination had to be endorsed by your manager. And so they took a lot of internal resources to really make this a strong program for their employees. And it was folks who were very early in their managerial role. They were relatively new in that type of responsibility. And this training, came at a time when they needed to know these things. So they had purpose. And so we had a monthly program where they were in class, in training. We even managed, and this predates my tenure with Catapult because I didn't join until after COVID, but managed to make it work during COVID with virtual types of experiences. We're now back to an in-person type of experience with them. And the folks that, and they had a graduation at the end of their program, and myself and some other folks from Catapult were invited. And what was really cool was not just seeing the graduates, but the alumni of that program at the graduation ceremony, and to hear, I got promoted last week. And so they went, and it's giving me cold chills to even talk about it, because graduation, if you're in education and that kind of graduation is the best day of the year. And so to see people finish out and they could look within their own organizations and see others who had been through that same program, and they saw the accomplishments that they were able to achieve. It was just wonderful. Reason we show up every day.
That's nice. Yeah, those graduations are nice. I know we're coming up on the season where we're getting some of those.
Exactly.
Jill, I'd like to ask you, we've talked a lot about the different kinds of training and development. How does this play out across different generations? And I know we don't want to generalize, and we want to focus on, the individual and what that person's needs are. But does this play out in different ways across different generations?
Well, absolutely. And, I think it's interesting to think about how things have changed so much and expectations for candidates coming into organizations and new employees. Back in the old days, some of us remember when we were just happy to get a job, we'd come in and we would just, heads down, they interviewed me, they hired me, and, I'm going to, hopefully grow, but don't ask too many questions. It's not like that anymore. So it's just been so interesting over the last 5-10 years, the newer generations coming into the workforce, starting with millennials, but for sure Gen Z. Their expectations coming into the workforce now are so different. They come in looking, right away in their interviews. They're asking, how will I develop? How will this company invest in me for my growth? And those are questions we never would have seen, 15, 20 years ago. But that is really the expectations. They're looking for growth, development. How quickly can I grow from this job to that job? And so these are the workers of the next, 20, 30 years. And so companies really need to be thinking about that. Again, if those new employees come in and they don't see a clear path for growth for them, they will be out. They will, they're going to move on to the next company that will invest in them. And that's what we've seen from a retention standpoint. It's just the reality. And it amazes us when we hear from our members, our companies who are calling us to help them with recruiting, and they say, we can't believe the questions we're even getting in interviews from candidates with expectations, the expectations they have. Because as we know, like you said, it's not just companies interviewing candidates. The candidates are interviewing the companies. They're looking for, it's not just a job anymore, but it's about their development. So that's just been a really interesting trend that I've seen over these last 5-10 years.
Yeah, and you mentioned the, what the data is showing and what you're seeing. It sounds like anecdotally as well as, statistically. A lot of companies want to make data-driven decisions on these kinds of things. Right. How can organizations measure, whether they're doing this well and whether they're engaging their employees well and whether they're going to stick around? What are some of the metrics they're looking at and should they be looking at?
Well, the number one way to get data from employees is to ask them. And so, I'm a big proponent of employee engagement surveys, and that's something Catapult does. We work with a number of organizations in this area, and you really want to understand what's important. And sometimes companies think they know what employees want in terms of work-life balance and benefits and development opportunities. They think they know, but when you ask employees, they will tell you. And it's not always the same things that employees expect it will be. So doing regular engagement surveys, pulse surveys, you can do quarterly pulse surveys. There's lots of different ways to do that. But the most important thing when you do those types of surveys is to make sure that you communicate why you're doing them. And then once you do them and you gather the data, it's important then to do something about it, because there's nothing worse than doing a survey for a company and then nothing happens. Then it becomes a negative. You have the opposite effect than you were hoping to have. But really, that's one way you can do it. Another thing is also to look at your turnover rates and your retention rate. Obviously, companies that are having high turnover, that's a metric you want to look at. Why is that happening? Why are people leaving? Are you doing exit interviews as people leave to understand what is making them leave? Where are they going? What's the reason that they're picking that new company? That's all data that companies need to gather. And even I think more important than exit data is doing stay interviews. I know my colleague Kendra Stewart talked about stay interviews yesterday during your session. To me, that's even more important. Stay interviews.
What is a stay interview?
Yeah,
let's spell it out.
That. So stay interviews are talking to employees and understanding what keeps them at your company. Why are they still there? Why are they, what are the reasons they come to work every day? What are the things that would make them leave? You really want to do stay interviews with your best employees, those that you really, you want to understand what keeps them there. So that will help you make those changes that will keep more people, will keep your best employees. So I think all of those things, it's not just one metric, but all of those things will contribute to really understanding what the culture is like, and how you can understand your employee engagement and make it a better workplace culture, an even better place to work. You want to be an employer of choice. Those are all ways to understand what's going on.
So you mentioned surveys, you mentioned stay interviews. Is there anything that managers can sort of build into their routines? Is there any way to be a better manager and to maybe be a little more dialed into what it is that's actually on the minds of your employees?
Absolutely. So, I think when I talk about stay interviews, that doesn't mean HR has to do the stay interviews. So stay interviews can be done right by the employee's manager. If there's a trust, good trust between an employee and a manager, then those managers should be having regular one-on-ones with their employees, understanding how's it going, knowing them as people, engaging them, not just as, workers. I mean, that's really key. So it's talking to them, understanding them. There's one of the things we know about the employee experience, the thing that has the most impact on an employee experience is the manager, is the direct supervisor. there's any reason why people leave, it's not usually for money. It's usually because of a manager and their disengagement from that manager. So the most important thing is, we talk about management training and development. That is key. So that's what I would say to that.
Very good. Carlie, you mentioned a little bit earlier some of the skills and some of the emerging skills and sort of the need, especially now with AI and some of these technological advances. I mean, what are you seeing on that, and how do, I know anybody can go on ChatGPT and play around with it.
Right.
It's pretty amazing, some of the things it can do, and it's kind of scary, some of the things it can do. But what are some of the best practices if you want to get your employees up to speed on some of these new digital tools? What should people be doing?
Well, I think that the first thing I would offer is that you don't want to just throw it at your employees. You do want to. From a leadership and a management standpoint, you want to make sure that you know why you're doing this and how you envision it contributing to the business, and ensuring because of that your communication to your employees as you're bringing in these new tools is clear and allows them time to adjust and see how it would apply and benefit in their day-to-day work. Beyond that, I think that it is a force that is coming, and different industries will embrace it more quickly, and it will change. It already has. That's the thing that I think. I recently started a book from a guy who left Google. He was Scary Smart is the name of the book. And it was all about his perspective on AI. And he starts with the scary part, which I think is where most of us are. This whole idea that machines will ultimately do everything that we do. And he kind of sets that into context because, in fact, most of our lives, we have watched machines pick up and do more of what we do. And that hasn't been particularly scary. I mean, I like the fact that my microwave warms up my leftovers in 30 seconds. There are benefits that have come from these machines that have picked up and do things for us. And so it kind of helped me kind of level set a little bit to start reading this book. I haven't finished it. He's working on dealing with the scary part first, which I really appreciate.
Well, hopefully you get to the smart part pretty soon.
And he does he's starting to blend into that and really talk about how machines have infinite capacity. Human beings do not. I can't combine what I know with what Jill knows and what you know, Tony, and become as smart as the three of us combined. But machines can do that. Machines can do that.
I think it's about understanding what they can do. I mean, I think you need to, and a lot of people say, well, maybe this is a fad or a phase. It doesn't seem to me like this is in that vein, and I guess you never really know. It seems more like the creation of the internet kind of phase, where this is something, I think it's in there, maybe some sort of faddish parts to it, but I think the march toward greater tech, greater technology, computers doing more things, I think is a long-term trend. And you need to get your mind around it. You don't have to necessarily use it, but I think you need to understand it for your business, or you are going to be left behind.
Yes. And Tony, I'll just bring it all the way back to some foundational digital skills that we train staff of all kinds of companies on, like Excel. Just having the ability to document and keep up with results that can then be fed into larger accumulating types of spreadsheets for business evaluation and analysis and that kind of thing. And having your frontline employees able to work in Excel is something that we receive inquiries about very regularly. And so it doesn't have to be the big, scary AI version of digital skills. It can be just foundational workplace tools like Excel and Word and PowerPoint that increase the productivity and the contributions of your employees. And by giving them that kind of training, you get so much more out of them. And their sense of contribution adds to that level of engagement and feeling valued, and therefore the retention. The best places that I've ever worked were places where I felt like what I had to offer was of great value, and I didn't want to leave. But we've all had the other experiences as well, where what we were offering wasn't highly valued, and we didn't see the opportunity to grow and contribute more. And so, people leave. And so this balance of what's your business need and how are you going to get your employees engaged and contributing towards that outcome that the business is looking towards is so critical.
Yeah, what are some of the technologies? What are you hearing from employers? What are they wanting? Is it sort of all of the above? Are you seeing any trends as far as what folks are asking for?
I'm just going to go back to Excel. We have the amount of training that we are doing right now on Excel, introductory, intermediate, and advanced, is astonishing to me. I just, and I love the fact that we have that capability, and that our members and employers, whether they're members or not, can come to Catapult, for that kind of training. It may sound elementary and basic to some people, but there are plenty of organizations out there who see the value in having more and more of their staff, trained in that. We do things that go beyond the basics in Microsoft, the Microsoft Suite, Word and Excel and PowerPoint and things like that. We run the gamut. But right now, I think you just have a lot of businesses that see that the employees that they're bringing in may be able to do this thing, but hey, if we could just add some additional technical skills to them, how much more productive would they be? And I think that the training on AI is a little bit of a misnomer, because I think what's going to end up happening is that there will be industry or organization applications of it that make sense. And so there might not be what we're learning about AI right now might end up being, kind of too general in the long term. And the organizations that are developing AI-based platforms for their industry, for their organization, you're going to have to learn that when you go into that world. You're going to learn it when you get in there. Yes, there are things like Copilot that you can add to your email, and it can help you organize information and things like that. So there are, in the Chat GPT, there are tools out there that we're all practicing and learning on a little bit as we go along. But my guess is that in a few years, we'll see that there will be industry and organization specifics, and that'll be a competitive advantage, that those organizations are developing something that's fit to them and give them an advantage in the marketplace.
Okay, one final question really for both of you in the few minutes that we have left. I mean, some people might be watching this and saying to themselves, gosh, all this training, you're talking about, outside classes and certification, this all sounds expensive. I don't have the budget for it. What are some what's some low-hanging fruit of how companies can just get some of this done, even if they don't have a big training budget?
Well, we mentioned earlier in the conversation the opportunity for things like mentorships and involvement in other projects. So there's training that you can do that requires a little bit of investment in time by your organization, but perhaps not as much of an impact on your budget. I would also say that the leadership of organizations, have an opportunity to model when they have learned and they have gone through some type of experience, and demonstrate the value of it, and ensure that the rest of the organization also, is encouraged to learn and to grow, whether it's informally or more formally. The other thing I'd throw out is that there are grants that if you have particularly employees that are being trained for new roles, There are grants that the state of North Carolina and other entities have to help support that. And so I wouldn't be shy about looking into that. I'm not an expert on it. I know we've worked with some of our member companies over the last several years to try and take advantage of that. And we love the opportunity to help them in that way. But it does require the employer themselves to pursue that grant, that kind of thing. So there's different ways to skin the cat, as they say.
Okay. We're just about out of time. Jill, any final thoughts?
Well, again, like I said in the beginning, the key is retaining employees and not being on that cycle of constant recruiting and hiring. That's going to be the return on investment for employers, is keeping those best performers. And the way to keep them engaged is investing in their growth, supporting work-life balance. I know you talked a lot about that in the last 2 days, acting on the feedback that they want, things that you learn, making sure that you act on the feedback so you're always working on your culture and engagement, making sure you've got competitive pay and benefits, things you talked about yesterday with Jackie. All of that is so important. The key is retaining those employees because again, the population is going down and you're not always going to be able to find the talent outside your organization.
Well, great. I think that's a good place to leave it. Carlie and Jill, thank you for the discussion today. I think we got a lot of good tips and a lot of good insights. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tony.
All right. To our listeners, thank you for listening. The Charlotte Ledger podcast is produced by Lindsey Banks.
This episode of the Charlotte Ledger podcast was presented by Catapult, providing North Carolina organizations with expert HR support and workplace solutions tailored to our region's unique needs.
QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com.